Welcome to the Piece of Me podcast. This is your space for all things peace, positivity, and finding balance to live your best life. Life gets busy, and at times it's messy. I'm here to help you clean things up and put peace back in its place. I'll share tips, ideas, interviews, mindset shifts, and fresh perspectives to help you along the way. Hi friends, it's Lexi Lee. If you're new here, welcome. And if you're not new, then welcome back and thanks for coming back to the podcast. Now, today's episode is part of the mental health awareness series here on the Piece of Me podcast. Each Monday in the month of May, I'll be featuring a different guest and different topics. Now, my guest today is Mike, and Mike is the host of the Craftsmen Online Podcast. In this particular episode, we'll talk about overcoming self-doubt in the workforce, harassment, hypnosis, toxic work environments, and much more. So sit back and take a listen to our conversation. My guest today is Mike. Mike is the host of the Craftsmen Online Podcast. And amongst a few things that we're going to dive into in this episode are things like the toxic work environment, discovering your inner confidence, and personal growth and development, amongst a few other things. So, Mike, welcome to the Piece of Me podcast.
Thank you for having me, Lexi. Happy to be here.
All right. So, Mike, before we dive into your story, if you would, can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself first?
Sure. Well, I'm a dad. I'm married. Professionally, I'm a healthcare marketing professional located in Northern Virginia, just outside of the nation's capital. I'm also a master mason, and as you said, a host of the Masonic podcast, Craftsmen Online.
Awesome. Now, as you know, the month of May is actually mental health awareness. So we do appreciate that you're coming on and sharing your story with us. So if you would kind of walk us through what it is that you went through, because I'm sure a lot of other people listening have experienced similar things. So if you would tell us what it is you went through.
Sure. Well, yeah, again, thanks for having me come on, especially during Mental Health Awareness Month. I'm not a mental health care professional, but I do feel it's important. And I understand that there's a lot of us that may not know what happens when you're in a toxic workplace, a toxic relationship, or even just in a toxic environment. And in a professional setting, just like in kind of a real life or real world setting, you'll notice that there's some warning signs to look out for. Like, for example, you'll have disconnected mid-level managers. There could be a lack of just culture, horrible things like sexual harassment, or feeling like you're the diversity or quote unquote token employee. A lot of what's continuing from the public health emergency is carrying over. I call it the COVID excuse, where people are literally telephoning it in instead of just phoning it in these days. A lot of virtual meetings and a kind of a meeting always first culture. You have organizations that are going through realignments, and sometimes you feel like you get lost in the shuffle. And through all of this, you have friends and colleagues who are saying, hey, I just got accepted into this new role, and they're sharing their excitement, and they seem to be moving forward in their career. And you feel like you're losing your vision or your center of what your goals are supposed to be all about. And somewhere in that sea of chaos and doubt, you begin to question your own personal confidence, where for me, it was literally questioning, am I good enough to do this job?
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. Now, what was it? I mean, you mentioned a lot of, the pandemic and how the workforce changed. And I think a lot of people have probably experienced, unfortunately, harassment in the workplace, sexual harassment in the workplace, managers that just maybe didn't lead with the best intentions or treat with respect. So kind of tell us a little bit more about your previous journey, kind of where you started, where you are now, kind of take us through that, when it comes to maybe your own workplace experience and what you went through.
Sure. Well, I started my professional career at the age of 15. I grew up in a small town in southwestern Arizona and was able to get into radio at a very young age. I always joke like I didn't always look like this, but I pretty much always sounded like it. And from there, I dropped out of college about 6 weeks into my freshman year at the age of 18 because I got my first radio contract. And from that point, it was just a 20-year career in broadcasting that took me from Arizona all the way to upstate New York, out to the eastern shore of Maryland, and then back to upstate. And through all of those moves and changes, I began to feel that that world was normal, and seeing the lack of professionalism that can sometimes exist at higher levels of management. A lot of the things that I talked about, companies being acquired or taken over by another broadcasting group. So there's an organizational realignment, being asked to do things that made you just personally feel uncomfortable, whether it was because that request was not one of your strengths as a talent or a skill, or it was just something that you had a problem with doing based on your own values or belief system. And seeing that world, I just thought that that was normal. The fast-paced media world that I had adopted as my profession, that's what happened. And when you talk about like sexual harassment, I deal with that from the opposite end, where later in the career, being more of an established manager, having a junior or associate level person make an accusation and feeling like you had to defend yourself. Now, this was way before the Me Too movement and when all this was happening, but it's much different when you're the accused and you feel like you're trying to fight for your good name because it feels like one complaint into the HR department, and now you're quickly just in this slippery slope of a world, and you're sitting here going, well, hey, I'm married, I have kids, and oh, by the way, I would never do anything of this nature, or it could be perceived to be this way. And you're really just questioning, your role in that company, that if everything did clear up, is that really somewhere that you would want to feel comfortable in, because that culture is now beginning to take root. So yeah, it was a really interesting early career. And then about mid-30s, I transitioned into more of a different professional setting. I went back to school to finish my undergrad, got into healthcare eventually, went to school for my MBA in healthcare leadership, and then did a year of legal studies at law school just to have more of a background on law and policy.
Now, I just want to go back to something you just said about the sexual harassment. And my first thought is, I'm sorry that you experienced that. Secondly, excuse me, is I don't think we hear a lot of that, for you to be open about that. We usually hear about it, like you said, the other way around. So it does happen to men too. And to put yourself in that's such a difficult thing to have to deal with when you're in an upper management position and you have a family and you're married, and it was just not something you would ever do to be accused of. So my apologies that you experienced that. A question for you: how old were you when you decided to go back for your undergrad?
Oh, geez. I think I was like 34, 35. It was right before, because I have quite an interesting past where, right when I was trying to put my life back on track, moving from radio to a different industry. So that would have been going back to school to start my undergrad. Conveniently, I always choose to do big things when other big things are happening in my life, like on a personal level. So at that point, it was when I first started going through my divorce and my first marriage. So yeah, I would say mid 30s for sure.
And that's so hard. Like you just said, you're dealing with something so hard, so difficult, and you're in your mid 30s and dealing, obviously you have to be so cognizant of, what you're going through, what your children are experiencing. And then here you are making this big decision to go back to school, especially when you started your career at such a young age. So, and I think a lot of people can relate to what you're saying right now. So where did your path then go from there?
After the divorce, yeah. I worked in healthcare for a while. I eventually got remarried and we relocated to the DC area.
Awesome. Awesome. So while you went through, I mean, and you just kind of paraphrased it in a nutshell, but obviously there was a lot to this, but how did you, I mean, obviously we're talking a lot of years, but how did you cope through all these changes, the hard times? How did you stay positive and just how did you kind of persevere?
Yeah, I think my therapist called it segmentation, was the term that she used, but it's really trying to find like personal, professional levels or buckets that you can put things into. And I never really saw like one thing being a distraction for this other crazy thing that was going on. But for example, like when I was going through my divorce, which, anyone that's gone through that, there's usually warning signs again in any relationship that, hey, this, may not be the long-term thing. And it's unfortunate. But you start to have a whole new perspective of people that have gone through that situation. Well, for me, I quickly realized that there's a ton of resources as far as books for women and grandchildren and kids, even pets, on how to deal with divorce, but there was nothing for men that were going through that situation. And
Wow.
yeah, so where do you turn to for advice is other divorce guys. And they can be sometimes more depressing than helpful when you hear about the outcomes that they had or just the negative energy that they bring into a conversation. So that's when I first discovered journaling, and I would write everything down. I would write my emotions down because I wanted to feel like I was communicating it to somebody. But also, I think another part of me saw that it would be helpful years later to look back at this and remember what that experience was like. The other idea I had was to just write a book someday on, how to go through this whole process. But that's the other crazy part is there's the beginning, but when you said, well, how do you feel about the end? Well, it's not over. I still have two awesome kids. My daughter's a sophomore in college. My son's a sophomore in high school. And while, I've remarried, my ex-wife has remarried, a lot of time and distance is now between the two of us. When can you really say that, this is over?
And I love that you say journaling was something that you used as an outlet because I talk a lot on this podcast about journaling and just how therapeutic it is. I actually have a whole episode just on how to get started with if you've never journaled before. So you'll have to go back and to the listeners and take a listen to that if it's something you want to start. But it's something that I do too. And I have found it to be, when you don't want to pick up the phone, to necessarily always be negative to somebody else, or maybe because the people around you aren't providing a positive, outlook on your situation. Maybe they're only adding to the negativity that you're going through. So you don't want to lean on those people, but instead you still need a place to let those feelings out. And I think journaling is a great place for that. So I can completely understand that. Now, how, like you said, the chapter, the book isn't over. Things are just really have turned around or going really well for you. But how long would you say over the years, this whole kind of healing process, learning process, how long has this been taking you at this point?
Um, I feel that each experience just better prepares you for the next one. And that's, I don't want to give you like an open-ended answer because I feel like you did ask a very pointed question, but the one thing that I have kind of taken as a little nugget of wisdom that I picked up was I read the book called The Joy of Happiness that the Dalai Lama wrote. And what I found really interesting was his approach to dealing with conflict or trying to seek resolution is that he opens up and has a dialogue with anybody who's willing to listen to him. And there's a specific part in the book where they talk about he'll speak to a world leader about important issues just as he would speak to the doorman or the bellhop at a hotel that he would be staying at. And I found that to be really interesting because he really wants to get everyone's perspective and as part of his decision-making process. And so that's how I look at experiences, is that it would be naive to think that everything that I've ever been through is that I'm the only person who's ever experienced anything like this situation, which is incorrect. Everybody's had it, but they've had what has been a very individual or personal experience to that. Just as in having conversations with people on problems that are existing in my life, things that they could tell me that they've been through. Well, geez, that's like seeing the hole before you step into it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what have you really learned from all this? Like, I mean, obviously the books and you, I think you mentioned earlier self growth and development. I mean, certainly you have only motivated yourself and pushed yourself to just keep going forward. So what is it that maybe you've learned through this experience?
I think there's a couple things. I mean, one is when you talk about healing, I find that that's an interesting choice of word because to me, that usually implies that there's been some sort of injury on your body. But as this episode, we're talking about mental health. And so that could also be an injury that affects the mind's process of just bonding over an injury, which, literally your body just produces a new layer to overcome that damage. So how are we doing that internally? And a lot of that is we get an experience and that gives us insight into the next thing. But we also can take a step back and really start doing some self-awareness and reflecting and sit here and go, hey, sometimes the ideas that I'm manufacturing for myself, sometimes the goals that I want to have in life really aren't what's ultimately supposed to happen for me. And there's a lot of discussions about, projecting and can you make things happen for yourself in your life? And sure, I'm sure you can. And I don't think that the ultimate goal to happiness is to just living like a little leaf in a stream and letting the water take where you need to go. I do think that you need to be an active participant in your life, but you also have to start spotting those hidden opportunities when they present themselves. And those are those little learning moments where you get those gems that help you for the next thing or prepare you to be the mentor for the person who's going to come to you for advice in the next place. It's just always keeping that open mindset.
So I'm going to kind of put you on the spot with this, but what type of little gems have you picked up on, or people who have maybe come into your life that have kind of shed light on that, or maybe been the opportunity for you?
Oh, sure. I mean, I seek them out. I try to find a whole network of contacts that can be mentors to me. And, to my friends that are listening, they know, like, they're the people that get the phone calls from me at 10 o'clock at night where it's like, hey, do you have an hour just to hear so we can go through this? I think the best advice that I ever got from a personal trainer when I worked in the health and fitness industry for a while was he said to a client one time, it takes you a lot of time for you to get your body into a physical situation. And to start the process to change that, it's going to take longer to make that change happen. And I think that that's the one thing that we have to start learning is to be patient. And I know the phrase has been used over and over, trusting the process, but really being able to kind of scaffold up some goals and putting some realistic benchmarks that go along the way so that you can guide your path. Like, if you were, and I've thought about it too. I've reconnected with friends from what seemed like a lifetime ago when I was just a 20-something-year-old, with his first radio job in Tucson, Arizona, and talking to a friend of mine who's no longer in the industry. And he's like, whoa, what are you doing? You work in basically DC and this is what you do with your life. And I'm like, yeah, who would have ever imagined that can happen? But that's really what it's all about, is just understanding that opportunity is everywhere. You're going to be able to find it. You just have to remain open to when those moments present themselves to you.
I agree. Now there's two questions here from some of the things you've been saying. You mentioned going back and talking to somebody who obviously feels like it was a lifetime ago. Now, do you still have the same kind of circle of people around you or support system, or have the people changed who used to be your support system to now?
It's interesting, right? Like, people come in and out of your lives. And it's always fun when I get to like reconnect with people. I'm like, wow, I was a much younger version of myself then. I actually had hair. I wasn't married the first time, or just people that you bump into just from even a few years ago. And it's just like, hey, I haven't talked with you since this. And, you can instantly get right back into conversations with those folks. And yeah, I think for me, the one thing that's been helpful is, being a part of Freemasonry and kind of a large fraternity. The one thing that I'm able to do there is just instantly kind of plug myself into a network of like-minded people where I can have open and honest dialogue conversations with. I think that's the real thing is, and it'll probably be a great topic for a future episode here on the Piece of Me podcast is, the importance of keeping positive people in your life. One thing that I determined through all the ups and downs and failed swings that I had was that I really had to cut out negative people. They just did not have space for them. When you start to identify what makes something toxic and how toxic is something that's going to pollute or take away your ability to have a positive outcome in what you're looking for. These are influencers, detractors. They're not influencers, they're detractors. They're going to take away.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the important thing is that when you identify that, yeah, I was able to keep my head above water swimming through my own drama because it was my own drama. Didn't seem weird to me because I was living in it every day. Just like if you were to get into my car, you'd be like, wow, this is what you think a clean car is like. Or if I went to visit a friend's house and I'm like, wouldn't have laid the furniture out this way, but that's what works for you. When you start to identify what a negative person takes from you, they're not bringing anything positive into the situation. So all of a sudden their drama becomes your drama, or you continue to find yourself involved with it. And you start by just taking a little break from this person. We all do it. Hey, I can't deal with this and you anymore. You got to go figure yourself out. But it's not something that I look forward to. But when you actually open up your phone and hit that delete contact button, you do have that kind of a fresh sense in your mind, like, okay, I'm able to move forward. That some things, some relationships you have to end. And if you look at it and from a business or a professional standpoint, is that, yeah, you had to fire a friend. It's a horrible feeling, but now you know what to look for so you don't make that mistake in the next one.
I think that is such a great point. And I could not agree with you more. It's such a powerful feeling, but it's also a very cleansing feeling when you do delete someone out of your phone who no longer serves you or is aligned with who you are as a person. I felt the same thing. I've had people in my life that it just wasn't working, or maybe I wasn't giving them what they need either, but either way, it wasn't benefiting both parties. And I just kind of took that proactive approach of not necessarily telling them that this wasn't working out, but just going in my phone and deleting them. And I felt such a sense of relief. And to what you said too about their drama didn't become my drama. It gave me the time to focus on what I needed to focus on while not adding to my plate. So I love what you said about that. And you mentioned earlier, just for the listeners, the Freemasonry. So could you just tell us what that is for those that might not know?
Well, we're the world's largest organization, and we're looking to secretly rule the world one pancake breakfast at a time. No, just kidding. It's the oldest fraternity that exists. And how would I explain Freemasonry? I would just say that, for me, it's a unique experience for every man that is looking to pursue it. And you're going to get a ton of answers from people, but I think everyone who enters into it, they're all asking kind of the same larger questions, like, what is my life? What is my purpose? How can I become a better person? And just going through the Masonic degrees, you definitely get what we call the working tools, which are the little resources you need or ideas on how to improve yourself. But ultimately, it's just like anything. We could give you the answers to the test, but you're still going to have to take it and be practical on the other side. So you'll get this, but it's how you use this and continue using it that teaches you how to become a better person, because you already were. It really gives you that confidence. Kind of tying back into that, like, when I realized that I was having a confidence issue, I reached out to a brother who's a Freemason, but who's also does hypnotism and therapy through it. And, most of his clientele are folks that are looking to quit smoking or make other health or lifestyle choices or changes. And I was like, hey, have you ever talked to somebody that's having kind of a confidence problem at work? Because I just didn't really feel that I was the best person for the job, or that I was doing the job and to my best ability. He's like, absolutely. So we had one session. I would say I didn't cluck like a chicken. I wasn't singing like Dolly Parton or any of that. It was super professional. I remember most of it because you are you're coherent, you're able to record this in your mind. But it is like the movie Inception, where a thought gets kind of put in, a suggestion, and almost immediately it took root, especially for me. And I'm sure a lot of that was just kind of the relief of going, okay, I've had this conversation, I've talked with a friend, I've got some new energy. But just looking back, all of the things that used to make me doubt myself, I just think back to that suggestion and I'm like, found my center, and I keep going. And if you're wondering, what is the suggestion? It's just that to accept change. It's a powerful force. It's not good. It's not bad. It just is. It exists, and change is going to happen over and over and over. It's an unavoidable part of human life, and you just have to be able to face it. You have to look back at everything that you've been able to conquer or rise above. And for those of us that have had a pretty bumpy road, that makes us stronger for the next time.
Absolutely. And they always say that the only constant is change. So to your point, yes, accept the change, because that's the only thing that is really inevitable. It's just going to keep happening. So, and you seem so positive. I think so many listeners right now are probably shocked to hear that you might have had some self-doubt in your career at different times. Did you feel a switch after that hypnotism that you had, if I'm saying that correctly? But
the session, yeah. I mean, I don't know if I would feel a switch, but it was like if, like the scene from Christmas Vacation when Clark is like trying to light the lights outside and his wife just walks in and like plugs the one thing and figures out what it takes. It's just somebody had disconnected that switch, and that somebody was me. That at some point I had allowed a thought or a suggestion from someone else, or just maybe even myself. I don't know where it came from, but it was a manufactured idea that just doubt. And it just was a nasty little seed that was able to sprout some roots. And it really got deep inside of me to where literally every day I would dread getting up to go to work, because I just felt that I was constantly making the wrong decisions, or I just didn't know how to do this. And taking a couple steps back and just having a really bright light shined on that little area of doubt, I realized, like, dude, you can do this. You can kill it. Like, you just have to believe in yourself and make it happen. And now I look back and kind of laugh, because it's like, that's not the hardest thing I ever faced in my life, personally or professionally. So why did it affect me at that little moment? Well, because of all the other things I kind of laid out. Like, all of these other factors just allowed it to sneak in. The other thing I would say is, you should not be drinking. That's the worst advice that you'll ever get. I had another colleague that was going through some bumps as well, and his solution to the problem was have another drink. And I don't believe you can ever drink yourself out of a problem, and that you should really, if you're going to have a drink, it should be to celebrate, a happy time. Don't drink when you're sad. And I think that that's something that we all kind of faced as well during the pandemic, where we were home, we were kind of bored. Wine sales did really well during then. But now that we're trying to, reacclimate with what this new world is going to be on the other side of COVID, there are some bad behaviors that we're going to have to kind of, put the lid back on. And I think that that's one of them.
And I've mentioned in another episode about how, alcohol does affect the way that we show up. So I think it's just, no one's saying that people shouldn't drink, but it's just to be aware of it, just to be cognizant that, like you said, if you're going to have a drink, maybe, and again, we're not telling anybody what to do, but use it to celebrate a good time, because it can certainly affect, if you're having a bad time or you're going through something hard, it can certainly affect the way that you show up. There's one thing that just kind of radiates off this conversation, and I'm not sure if the listeners are picking up on this, but you have so much personal accountability. I mean, just so much for who you're surrounding yourself with, your personal growth, finding the mentors, the masonry, the just pushing. I mean, going back to school. I mean, the fact that you started your career so young. Obviously you had talent, and I'm sure by people listening to your voice, they can tell, yep, this guy was certainly on radio because he has the voice for it. But you've had such a different career. You were in media, you've branched off into other things. You've gone back to school. You have your master's now. Now you're pursuing law. I mean, what an incredible story. And how old are you again?
I'm 45 and my favorite color is blue.
So, I mean, that's incredible. And so many people I think can, maybe wonder, do I have what it takes to, can I go back to school? Can I do better? Or they're doubting themselves and have gone through a lot of the same things that you're mentioning right now. So, but you just have so much personal accountability. And I think that's a big point to make, that you have to look deep within yourself. And that's where a lot of that work comes into play, because you got to look at yourself. You can't just, look at everything around you as just the environment, but you have to look inwards. Now, we were talking a little bit about, and you kind of already alluded to this, of some of the best advice you were ever given, or the worst advice. But if you could just kind of, if there's maybe anything else you'd like to share with that, but just maybe for other people who are going through something similar, whether it's a toxic work environment, or just feeling stuck in their career, or they're going through hard things and feeling like they can't, do something to better themselves or to find positivity in a negative time. But what other maybe good or bad advice could you share with listeners to help them through something hard that they're
Sure.
going through?
Yeah. So if right now, you have a challenge or a trouble, what we tend to do is just, picture a hole, right? And you kind of climb into it and you find a little spot in the hole. You can't figure your way out of it. The sides are too slippery. It's too dark. You don't know if you're ever going to have the strength to pull yourself out of it. You get down and it happens, right? And what we tend to do is just feel like that is going to be our permanent situation. And what I try to do when times get bad is just remember, like, think about the good times about things. And in life, I think we tend to put on, our goggles, and we can sit there and think about, a wonderful vacation that we had, but we don't remember that, our flight got delayed, or our luggage didn't show up at the carousel at just the right time, or maybe it wasn't completely sunny, or whatever. The food wasn't completely perfect, but everything else about that moment in our mind was fantastic and wonderful. And that's how we remember things. Well, the same things happen with the bad times. We just think about the extreme lows that go through it. So what I would say is, through every challenge that I've had, I've just really taken a step back and been like, okay, how long am I going through this for? Okay, realistically, this could be 3, 4, 5, 6 months, or maybe a year or two, but this isn't going to be the rest of my life, because I want to live to be 100. I mean, I don't want to live forever. Who does? But I want to live and have a full life. So if I've been able to get all the way up here, this is just a really small portion of my life that I'm going through right now. I've had to do other big things to get through this, to go through that. Think about challenges with maybe school, or some sort of studying or learning, or just any other way you were trying to better yourself. Fitness goals, anything. You've already done very hard things that take a long time to make them happen. This thing that's in front of you right now, I'm not saying it's not a big deal. It probably is, but you're going to get through it, and you're going to have a wonderful time on the other backside of it. And then guess what? There's going to be 5, 6, 7, who knows how many other rough spots that get up until you reach, that finish line in your life, where the biggest challenge that you have is just making sure you can get up and be mobile and enjoy those golden years.
I agree. And I love what you said with that, because when you're going through something hard, it's just it might, maybe not small, but it's a bump in the road, but you're going to get to the other side. And that's something that I've used too, of it's not forever. It's just for now. And I think that's a good way to look at it. And sometimes we focus on more of the negative, like you said, with the vacation analogy. That's such a great point. And again, I just think listeners are going to be so inspired by you, because I mean, you've just done so much, and your mindset is so positive. So to hear you even say that you struggled with some things, I mean, people are just going to think, wow, I want to get to where he is. I want to have that perspective. So is there anything else that maybe I haven't asked you in this conversation, but something that you'd like to share with the audience, or just maybe there was something else you'd like to share that we just haven't gotten to?
Sorry, I had a cough. I think one thing that we could visit or expand on is coping. And it's really how you're going to get through it, because identifying that you have a problem is always the first step, right? Anybody that's been through a 12-step program, they'll understand that. My thought when it comes to problem solving is, hey, if you're part of the problem, guess what? The good news is you're also part of the solution. So when I first was going through my divorce, my way of coping with things, I picked up a pack of cigarettes and I started smoking again after I had quit for 4 years and was really down on myself. And what I picked up next were running shoes. And I seriously tried to run off all the frustrations I had. I was trying to run away from my problems, so to speak. And a bad habit and a good habit kind of came together. And that's where I quickly found out the importance of having a strong network of people that you can talk to and tell anything to them. But a big thing comes with that. And what I would caution is that you can't be two different people. You can't be somebody who is one person in a private setting and another away when it comes to work. You got to be the same person all the time. So you do have those true organic friendships and relationships. And that's how you can pick up the phone and tap into somebody and say, oh, I remember when, Sam was going through this problem, or Jason or Sarah or Kim or whoever. And they'll be there to help you because you are your real authentic self through all of those times in your life.
I love that. Yes. Be the same person. No, I love that. That's great. And again, I think our listeners are really going to be, this might be one of those episodes people have to go back and listen to twice because, or share with someone they know, because I really do. I think it's very inspiring, and it's very, you're just kind of a breath of fresh air, and you can just kind of feel the positivity radiating off of you. So Mike, really, thank you so much for joining us on the Piece of Me podcast. It was really enjoyable to talk with you and hear your story. So thank you for sharing it.
Absolutely. And I think what you're doing, setting aside time to talk about mental health awareness during this month, is very meaningful. And I hope everybody listening does take that time to do a little self-inventory, a little reflection, and enjoy when you are having the good times.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks, Mike. Thanks for talking with us. I've created this space to help you live your best life. If you want to help support the podcast in return, I'd be forever grateful of your support. Please give this show a rating or share an episode with a friend. You can also join me on Instagram at the Piece of Me Podcast. Let's stay connected.